So right now, as you're listening to this, I actually want you to just take a quick second and notice your reality.
Just kind of tune into what's happening around you.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're hearing the sound of my voice.
Right.
You might be looking at a wall or maybe the road ahead of you if you're driving. You can probably feel the temperature of the air on your skin or even just, the weight of your shoes.
Right. There's a lot going on.
There is. And yet your brain doesn't hand you a bunch of separate chaotic files for all of that. It hands you a single unified experience. It just feels like, well, now
It feels seamless.
totally seamless. But when you actually look under the hood at how the brain works, like the actual physical geography of it,
Yeah.
it's quite strange that this feeling of a unified now exists at all. I mean, we're doing a deep dive today into a paper that really shakes this whole concept up.
We are. And what you're describing to the listener, that seamless feeling, it's formally known in neuroscience as the binding problem.
The binding problem.
Yeah, and to understand why it's a problem, we have to think about the physical layout of the brain. Like, visual processing happens all the way in the back in the occipital lobe.
Right, completely isolated from other stuff.
Exactly. Sensory input from your skin is processed along a strip near the top of your head, and then auditory information is handled on the sides.
So they are literally physically distributed in different areas.
Highly distributed. These are incredibly different neural processes, and they're operating at different speeds. So the mystery has always been, how do all these disparate networks stitch their separate data streams together to form one finite conscious episode?
Instead of just being like a jumble of unrelated events.
Right. Why isn't it just chaos?
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because for the longest time, this felt like, an unsolvable philosophical mystery, just people debating in armchairs.
Oh, absolutely. Decades of debate.
But today, our mission for this deep dive is to explore a really dense, highly technical paper by an independent researcher, Miguel Jorge Díaz Luna, and it's titled Shared Temporal Episodes.
It's a fascinating piece of work.
It really is. And what makes this worth digging into, I think, is that it moves away from all those abstract philosophical debates about consciousness. We are finally looking at a solid, testable mathematical model for what a moment of consciousness actually is, mechanically speaking.
And that shift we're seeing here is just crucial. We are stepping firmly out of philosophy and into the realm of measurable neurodynamics.
Which is so refreshing.
It is. Díaz Luna's paper uses a mathematical framework called nodal theory, and specifically utilizes what are known as topological tensor networks, or PTN for short.
TTN, got it.
Yeah, TTN. And he uses this to explain how these cognitive moments form, how they persist, and ultimately how they break down. It basically provides a physical, structural reason for why a thought inevitably ends.
Which is wild to think about. But before we get to the TTN math, we should probably establish what the brain's present moment actually looks like on a biological level.
That's the good place to start.
Because I think people assume a moment is just, a tiny instantaneous point in time, like a single frame on a film strip, 0 seconds long.
Right, but the biology tells a very different story. In the paper, Díaz Luna emphasizes that a cognitive episode has what we call temporal thickness.
Temporal thickness. Okay, I like that term.
Yeah, it's not an instantaneous 0-second flash. It is a finite interval of time that has a distinct beginning, a period where the neural network stabilizes, and then a moment where it dissolves or reorganizes entirely.
And we can actually see this temporal thickness, right? Like in real-world signal processing in the brain.
We can, yes. It's measurable.
The paper points to EEG and MEG microstates. And just to clarify for the listener, EEG electroencephalography is when we place sensors on the scalp to measure the electrical chatter of the brain.
Right, the standard brainwave nets you see in labs.
Exactly. And MEG magnetoencephalography is mapping the tiny magnetic fields produced by those same electrical currents.
Which is a bit more precise spatially, yeah.
Right. And both of these tools reveal these quasi-stable electrical patterns in the brain that last anywhere from tens to hundreds of milliseconds.
And those microstates are the physical evidence of that temporal thickness we were just talking about.
So it takes time to literally hold the thought.
Exactly. The paper also discusses gamma band reference frequencies. These are brain waves that oscillate at about 40 to 80 hertz.
Meaning like 40 to 80 cycles per second.
Yes. So biologically speaking, a single now for you is basically a 100 millisecond window of brain activity that is physically holding itself together across different regions.
Which brings us to how the brain actually manages to hold it together. Because for decades, the classic scientific assumption for how this happens was pretty much just one word, right? Synchrony.
Synchrony, yes. The idea was that different parts of the brain simply synchronize their rhythms.
Their brainwaves just match up.
They mash up, they fire at the same time, and boom, you have a unified cognitive moment. They called it communication through coherence.
Communication through coherence. I've always pictured this like an orchestra.
Oh, that's a classic analogy.
Right. You have all these different sections, the strings, the brass, the woodwinds, and they are all playing completely different instruments. But because they are following the same conductor, they are perfectly in sync, and they create one unified song.
That's exactly how the prevailing model viewed it. If the visual cortex and the auditory cortex were oscillating in phase with each other, researchers just assumed they were bound together in a single conscious perception.
Which sounds intuitive, and here's where I kind of struggle with that classic neuroscience view. If it's just about the orchestra being in sync, why do these cognitive moments inevitably end?
That's the big question.
Right, like does the orchestra just get tired? Synchrony alone doesn't explain how or why the song actually stops.
And that, right there, is the blind spot of the old synchrony models. A purely threshold-based synchrony model, one that only looks at whether brainwaves are matching, just doesn't account for the physical constraints of the brain.
Because it's not a computer, right?
Exactly. The brain is made of wet biological tissue. Signals take time to travel down the physical cables called axons. There are synaptic delays at every connection.
It's messy.
Very messy. There's constant random biological noise, like your heartbeat or fluctuations in blood flow.
So the signals from the visual cortex in the back of the head might literally be like a few milliseconds behind the signals from the auditory cortex, just because of the sheer physical distance the electricity has to travel.
Precisely. It's a physical latency issue. And that question, why the moment ends, is exactly what the nodal theory layer in this paper finally answers.
Okay, so let's get into nodal theory.
So, the acronym TTN, topological tensor network. I know it sounds intimidating.
It really does. It sounds like a sci-fi weapon.
It does, but it's really just a mathematical way to map two things simultaneously. Topology looks at the physical shape of the network, like who is connected to whom.
The blueprint.
Right. And then tensor mathematics allows us to track the dynamic flow of data through that specific shape over time. By combining them, the framework shifts the question from, are these brain regions in sync, to how much physical effort does it actually take to stay in sync?
Which is a huge distinction. Enter nodal theory. The paper introduces this concept called nodal pressure. How do we even define that in the context of brain tissue?
So nodal pressure is the mathematical accumulation of load, or shear effort, required to sustain coordination across a brain network, despite all those physical challenges we just mentioned.
So fighting the latency and the noise.
Yes, the brain is constantly dealing with heterogeneous frequencies, physical communication delays, biological noise. Nodal pressure quantifies the structural strain the brain is under while it tries to keep a specific coalition of neurons locked in sync.
So it's sort of like trying to hold open several heavy spring-loaded doors at the exact same time.
I like that.
Right, so you might be perfectly synchronized initially. You've got your arms out, your feet are planted, all the doors are wide open, and if someone takes a snapshot of you, they'd say, wow, perfect coherence.
Everything looks stable in the snapshot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the pressure is building. Your muscles are shaking. The springs are pushing back. The picture looks stable, but internally that structural load is increasing, and eventually a door is going to slip.
That analogy maps so well to the second core concept introduced here, which is effective capacity.
Effective capacity.
Yeah, in the TTN framework, capacity isn't just a raw count of how many neurons are firing. It is a topological limit.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means it's the absolute maximum amount of structural pressure that a specific network shape can handle before it mathematically and physically collapses.
The brain literally has a finite limit to how much spring-loaded door pressure it can take.
Yes, and that brings us to the core invariant rule of the paper, which is just a major paradigm shift for neuroscience.
Okay, lay it on me.
Díaz posits that coherent organization in the brain is only viable while the normalized nodal pressure remains below the network's finite capacity.
So synchrony isn't enough.
Right. Synchrony is necessary, but it is entirely insufficient on its own.
You can be completely in sync, but if the pressure crosses that capacity threshold, the whole thing just shatters.
Exactly. A candidate brain coalition must be coherent and connected, but it must also be operating below that pressure limit to be considered an admissible cognitive episode.
An admissible episode.
Right. If it exceeds capacity, the network is forced to reorganize, no matter how perfectly synchronized it might have looked literally a millisecond prior. The physical structure simply cannot sustain the energy required to force those delayed signals back into phase.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the actual lived experience of a human being? Because, I mean, this is a lot of complex neurodynamics. We're talking about tensors and capacity limits, but it has to map onto our psychology somehow.
It absolutely does. If we look at this model from the point of view of a psychologist, specifically one interested in temporal integration, it provides a structural explanation for something called the specious present.
The specious present, yeah, I've heard that term in neurophenomenology. It goes back to William James, right?
Yeah, it does. It refers to the psychological fact that our subjective experience of the present is extended.
It's not just a freeze frame.
Right. When you hear a melody in a song, you don't just hear isolated notes, you hear a flowing tune, because the previous note is still somehow held in your present experience alongside the current note.
It lingers.
Exactly. The present has a duration. And for psychologists, Diaz-Luna's paper is highly significant because it provides a disciplined, operational test for this phenomenon.
Because historically, it was kind of messy to prove, right?
Very messy. There was a huge risk of circular logic in neuroscience. Researchers would look at an EEG, they'd see synchronous brain waves, and say, look, they are coherent, so that must be a cognitive moment.
Right, they were drawing the bullseye around the arrow after it landed. They just assumed the synchrony was the thought without explaining why it actually held together.
Exactly. But Diaz-Luna's model prevents that circularity. It requires researchers to declare their parameters before the test even begins.
Oh, interesting. So you have to lay out your assumptions first.
Yes. You have to pre-declare the neural components you are observing, set a fixed temporal scale, like a 100 to 300 millisecond perceptual integration window, and then test if the brain coalition can mathematically maintain coordination under pressure long enough to actually count as a shared temporal episode.
So the network has to survive the pressure test for that entire duration to actually become a moment of your reality.
Precisely. It has to survive the overhead.
So think about this in everyday life. Let's say I am doing something that requires intense focus. Like, I don't know, I'm threading a needle or trying to read a really dense paragraph.
High cognitive load tasks.
Right. I assume my brain is trying to keep the nodal pressure low so my cognitive episode doesn't collapse. But how does it actually do that? The paper mentions constraint gates, but I'm struggling with this a bit. Like, is the brain physically turning off certain neurons? Or is it just ignoring them? How does it actually shut the door on distractions, like, say, the sound of my fridge humming in the background?
It is a physical suppression. When you are focusing on a task, the input doesn't just add more activity to the brain. It actually acts structurally as a constraint gate.
A constraint gate, meaning it blocks things.
Yes. The brain utilizes inhibitory neurotransmitters, primarily GABA, to actively dampen or shut down the neural pathways processing that fridge humming.
So it's actively blocking the auditory cortex from sending data to the frontal lobe, so the frontal lobe doesn't have to carry the pressure of those extra signals.
Exactly that. By suppressing those irrelevant, inadmissible channels, the brain is actively protecting the temporal episode from pressure overload.
Wow.
It is managing the load so that the specific coalition of neurons processing the visual and motor feedback of the needle and thread can maintain their sync for the hundreds of milliseconds required for you to perceive it and act on it.
So focus is, mathematically and physically speaking, successful pressure management.
It really is.
Okay, so if task focus is the successful management of pressure, what physical mechanisms are failing in a patient whose thoughts constantly race or fracture? Because things don't always go perfectly, and the paper dives deep into understanding clinical cognitive fragmentation.
Yes, and this is where the implications become deeply profound for medicine and psychiatry. The paper details a topology stress test and demonstrates something called pressure-led breakdown.
I saw that. There's a specific diagnostic proof of concept in Figure 6 of the study that illustrates this beautifully, I think.
It really does.
Yeah, I was looking at Figure 6. It plots the classical synchrony against this new nodal pressure over time, and the visual is so striking because it upends the old way of diagnosing these states.
It reveals that a neural coalition can remain highly synchronized by classical standards, meaning if you were just looking at a standard EEG coherence filter, the waves are matching up.
So a doctor would look at it and say, everything is fine.
Right. You would say, everything is fine, this is a stable cognitive moment. But simultaneously, the nodal pressure in the TTN model is skyrocketing because of delays or noise.
So the coalition has become structurally inadmissible, even while it looks synchronized on the surface.
Exactly. It's a false positive.
We thought they were having a stable cognitive moment, but mathematically, the physical structure is failing underneath.
Yes. And when that admissibility fails, when the pressure mathematically exceeds the topological capacity, the network undergoes what we call phase slips.
Phase slips. Okay, let's break down phase slips for a second. Is that when the brainwaves start drifting out of alignment because the physical delay is just too great to correct?
Yes. Think of two pendulum clocks trying to tick together, but one is on a slightly wobbly table.
Okay, so there's interference.
Right. Over time, the physical noise causes them to drift. The brain has to expend massive energy to force those neural oscillations back into phase.
Which increases the pressure.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And when the effort to pull them back exceeds the network's capacity, you get an admissibility violation. The unified moment abruptly ends. The network shatters and is forced into a structural reorganization.
So, applying this to clinical fragmentation, like when patients with certain neurological or psychiatric conditions report fragmented thoughts or ambiguous, chaotic perception, we used to think, oh, their brain is just losing synchrony, the waves aren't lining up, or maybe that there was a lack of brain activity in certain areas.
But this model suggests something entirely different. For patients experiencing cognitive fragmentation, it is not necessarily a lack of activity or a simple loss of raw synchrony. It is a delay and noise overload.
An overload.
Yes, their cognitive networks are being forced to carry a load that exceeds their structural topological capacity.
Let's ditch the abstract math for a second to really picture this. It sounds like a group of people trying to carry a very heavy, fragile pane of glass across a room with a terribly uneven floor.
That's a great visual.
Right, so they might all be stepping in perfect sync initially. But the uneven terrain, which is the biological noise and the sheer weight of the glass, the nodal pressure are just too much.
The load is too high.
Yeah, no matter how well they coordinate, the physical constraints force them to drop the glass before they make it across the room. The thought shatters before it finishes.
That captures the mechanics perfectly. The overload causes continuous phase slips. The brain's network is forced to prematurely shatter and reorganize over and over again.
So they can't hold the thought.
Right. The patient's brain is continually tricked to form a shared temporal episode. But the nodal pressure blows past the capacity limit before the thought can achieve the minimum 100 or 200 milliseconds of temporal thickness needed to become a fully unified perception.
A thought literally doesn't have enough time to structurally stabilize.
Exactly.
The brain is trying to build the now, but the physical noise and communication delays in the network are just too high, so the now fractures into a million little pieces.
That is the physical reality of cognitive fragmentation. It is an admissibility violation at the structural level. The components are there, they are trying to sync, but the pressure overhead is just too massive to sustain the episode.
It really makes you realize how delicate our grip on reality really is. Every single second is like a high-wire act of pressure management.
It is a meticulously managed, dynamically negotiated coalition of neurons, which is exactly why this paper is such a leap forward. It takes the subjective mystery of a conscious moment and turns it into a falsifiable mathematical model of structural capacity.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. To summarize this journey for everyone listening, cognitive binding, the way you experience the world as a seamless whole, isn't just some magical flash of synchronized brainwaves.
Far from it.
Every conscious moment you are experiencing right now, listening to my voice, feeling the temperature of the room, thinking about what we're saying, is a meticulously managed, pressure-tested coalition in your brain. Your neural networks are constantly calculating the load, physically shutting down irrelevant noise using those constraint gates, and successfully avoiding structural collapse hundreds of times a second.
It's an invisible physical architecture holding your reality together, moment by moment.
It really is. And this leaves me with a final, slightly wild thought to mull over, building on Díaz Luna's text. If our subjective present moment is strictly governed by this finite capacity and nodal pressure, what happens as technology advances?
Oh, this is an interesting question.
Right. Could we one day use targeted neuromodulation to artificially lower a person's network pressure?
By fundamentally altering the topological constraints, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we could do that, could we effectively stretch out a single shared temporal episode? Imagine lowering the network pressure so efficiently that a person subjectively experiences what is physically just a few milliseconds as an absolute eternity.
Modifying the capacity limit could alter the human experience of time itself. It's a fascinating implication of the physics.
It really is. So, as you go back to your day, look around you one more time. The seamless reality you're experiencing right now is just a fragile coalition your brain is building, holding back the pressure millisecond by millisecond. Try not to think too hard about the spring loaded doors.